37. With Pope Francis, therefore, one must conclude that wealth has increased, but together with inequality, with the result that new forms of poverty are emerging. The claim that the modern world has reduced poverty is made by measuring poverty with criteria from the past that do not correspond to present-day realities. As a result, poverty can take a variety of forms, such as an obsession with reducing labor costs with no concern for its grave consequences, since the unemployment that it directly generates leads to the expansion of poverty. Among these destructive effects of the empire of money, it must be recognized that there is no poverty worse than that which takes work away and the dignity of the work. Moreover, if some people are born into a country or family where they have fewer opportunities to develop, we should acknowledge that this is contrary to their dignity, which is the same dignity as that of those born into a wealthy family or country. We are all responsible for this stark inequality, albeit to varying degrees. 38. Another tragedy that denies human dignity, both in the past and today, is war. War, terrorist attacks, racial or religious persecution, and many other affronts to human dignity have become so common as to constitute a real Third World War fought piecemeal. With its trail of destruction and suffering, war attacks human dignity in both the form of the long and the short terms. While reaffirming the inalienable right to self-defense and the responsibility to protect those whose lives are threatened, we must acknowledge that war is always a defeat of humanity. No war is worth the tears of a mother who has seen her child mutilated or killed. No war is worth the loss of the life of even one human being, a sacred being created in the image and likeness of the Creator. No war is worth the poisoning of our common home, and no war is worth the despair of those who are forced to leave their homeland and are deprived, from one moment to the next, of their homes and all the family, friendship, social, and cultural ties that have been built up sometimes over generations. All wars, by the mere fact that they contradict human dignity, are conflicts that will not solve problems, but only increase them. This point is even more critical in our time, when it has become commonplace for so many innocent civilians to perish beyond the confines of a battlefield. 39. Therefore, even today, the Church cannot but make her own the words of the pontiffs, repeating with Pope St. Paul VI, "Never again war, never again war." Moreover, together with Pope St. John Paul II, the Church pleads, "In the name of God and in the name of man, do not kill, do not prepare destruction and extermination for people. Think of your brothers and sisters who are suffering hunger and misery. Respect each one's dignity and freedom." As much, now as ever, this is the cry of the Church and of all humanity. Pope Francis underscores this by stating, "We can no longer think of war as a solution, because its risks will probably always be greater than its supposed benefits. In view of this, it is very difficult nowadays to invoke the rational criteria elaborated in early centuries to speak of the possibility of a just war. Never again war." Since humanity often falls back into the same mistakes of the past, in order to make peace a reality, we must move away from the logic of the legitimacy of war. The intimate relationship between faith and human dignity means it would be contradictory for war to be based on religious convictions. The one who calls upon God's name to justify terrorism, violence, and war does not follow God's path. War in the name of religion becomes a war against religion itself. 40. Migrants are among the first victim of multiple forms of poverty. Not only is their dignity denied in their home countries, but also their lives are put at risk because they no longer have the means to start a family, to work, or to feed themselves. Once they have arrived in countries that should be able to accept them, migrants are not seen as entitled, like others, to participate in the life of society, and it is forgotten that they possess the same intrinsic dignity as any person. No one will ever openly deny that they are human beings, yet in practice, by our decisions and the way we treat them, we can show that we consider them less worthy, less important, less human. Therefore, it is urgent to remember that every migrant is a human person who, as such, possesses fundamental, inalienable rights that must be respected by everyone and in every circumstance. Receiving migrants is an important and meaningful way of defending the inalienable dignity of each human person, regardless of origin, race, or religion. 41. Human trafficking must also be counted among the grave violations of human dignity. While it is not a new phenomenon, it has taken on tragic dimensions before our eyes, which is why Pope Francis has denounced it in particularly emphatic terms. I reaffirm here that the trade in people is a vile activity, a disgrace to our societies that claim to be civilized. Exploiters and clients at all levels should make a serious examination of conscience, both in the first person and before God. Today, the Church is renewing her urgent appeal that the dignity and centrality of every individual always be safeguarded, with respect for fundamental rights, as her social teaching emphasizes. She asks that these rights really be extended for millions of men and women on every continent, wherever they are, wherever they may not be recognized. In a world in which a lot is said about rights, how often is human dignity actually trampled upon? In a world in which so much is said about rights, it seems that the only thing that has any rights is money. 42. For those reasons, the Church and humanity must not cease fighting against such phenomena as the marketing of human organs and tissues, the sexual exploitation of boys and girls, slave labor, including prostitution, the drug and weapons trade, terrorism, and international organized crime. Such is the magnitude of these situations and their toll in innocent lives that we must avoid every temptation to fall into a declarationist nominalism that would assuage our consciences. We need to ensure that our institutions are truly effective in the struggle against all these scourges. Confronted with these varied and brutal denials of human dignity, we need to be increasingly aware that human trafficking is a crime against humanity. It essentially denies human dignity in at least two ways. Trafficking profoundly disfigures the humanity of the victim, offending his or her freedom and dignity, yet at the same time, it dehumanizes those who carry it out. 43. The profound dignity inherent in human beings in their entirety of mind and body also allows us to understand why all sexual abuse leaves deep scars in the hearts of those who suffer it. Indeed, those who suffer sexual abuse experience real wounds in their human dignity. These are sufferings that can last a lifetime and that no repentance can remedy. This phenomenon is widespread in society, and it also affects the Church and represents a serious obstacle to her mission. From this stems the Church's ceaseless efforts to put an end to all kinds of abuse, starting from within. 44. Violence against women is a global scandal that is gaining increasing recognition. While the equal dignity of women may be recognized in words, the inequalities between women and men in some countries remain very serious. Even in the most developed and democratic countries, the concrete social reality testifies to the fact that women are often not accorded the same dignity as men. Pope Francis highlighted this when he affirmed that the organization of societies worldwide is still far from reflecting clearly that women possess the same dignity and identical rights as men. We say one thing with words, but our decisions and reality tell another story. Indeed, doubly poor are those women who endure situations of exclusion, mistreatment, and violence, since they are frequently less able to defend their rights. 45. Pope St. John Paul II recognized that much remains to be done to prevent discrimination against those who have chosen to be wives and mothers. There is an urgent need to achieve real equality in every area: equal pay for equal work, protection for working mothers, fairness in career advancements, equality of spouses with regard to family rights, and the recognition of everything that is part of the rights and duties of citizens in a democratic state. Indeed, inequalities in these areas are also various forms of violence. He also recalled that the time has come to condemn vigorously the types of sexual violence which frequently have women for their object, and to pass laws which effectively defend them from such violence. Nor can we fail, in the name of the respect due to the human person, to condemn the widespread hedonistic and commercial culture which encourages the systematic exploitation of sexuality and corrupts even very young girls into letting their bodies be used for profit. Among the forms of violence carried out on women, how can we not mention coercive abortions, which affect both mother and child, often to satisfy the selfishness of males? And how can we not also mention the practice of polygamy? As the Catechism of the Catholic Church reminds us, polygamy is contrary to the equal dignity of women and men. It is also contrary to conjugal love, which is undivided and exclusive. 46. In this consideration of violence against women, one cannot condemn enough the phenomenon of femicide. On this front, the entire international community must have a coordinated and concrete commitment. As Pope Francis reiterated, our love for Mary must help us to feel appreciation and gratitude for women, for our mothers and grandmothers, who are a bastion in the life, in our cities, in our homes. Almost always in silence, they carry life forward. It is the silence and strength of hope. Thank you for your witness. But in thinking of our mothers and grandmothers, I want to invite you to combat a scourge that affects our American continent. The numerous cases where women are killed, and the many situations of violence that are kept quiet behind so many walls. I ask you to fight against this source of suffering by calling for legislation and a culture that repudiates every form of violence. 47. The Church consistently reminds us that the dignity of every human being has an intrinsic character and is valid from the moment of conception until natural death. It is precisely the affirmation of such dignity that is the inalienable prerequisite for the protection of a personal and social existence, and also the necessary condition for fraternity and social friendship to be realized among all the peoples of the earth. On account of the intangible value of human life, the Church's magisterium has always spoken out against abortion. In this regard, Pope St. John Paul II writes, "Among all the crimes which can be committed against life, procured abortion has characteristics making it particularly serious and deplorable. But today, in many people's consciences, the perception of its gravity has become progressively obscured. The acceptability of abortion in the popular mind, in behavior, and even in law itself is a telling sign of an extremely dangerous crisis of the moral sense, which is becoming more and more incapable of distinguishing between good and evil, even when the fundamental right to life is at stake. Given such a grave situation, we need now, more than ever, to have the courage to look the truth in the eye and to call things by their proper name, without yielding to convenient compromises or to the temptation of self-deception. In this regard, the reproach of the prophet is extremely straightforward. Woe to those who call evil good and good evil, who put darkness for light and light for darkness. Especially in the case of abortion, there is a widespread use of ambiguous terminology, such as interruption of pregnancy, which tends to hide abortion's true nature and to attenuate its seriousness in public opinion. Perhaps this linguistic phenomenon is itself a symptom of an uneasiness of conscience, but no word has the power to change the reality of things. Procured abortion is the deliberate and direct killing, by whatever means it is carried out, of a human being in the initial phase of his or her existence, exceeding from conception to birth. Unborn children are thus the most defenseless and innocent among us. Nowadays, efforts are made to deny them their human dignity and to do with them whatever one pleases, taking their lives and passing laws preventing anyone from standing in the way of this. It must, therefore, be stated with all force and clarity, even in our time, that this defense of unborn life is closely linked to the defense of each and every other human right. It involves the conviction that a human being is always sacred and inviolable, in any situation and at every stage of development. Human beings are ends in themselves, and never a means of resolving other problems. Once this conviction disappears, so do solid and lasting foundations for the defense of human rights, which would always be subject to the passing whims of the powers that be. Reason alone is sufficient to recognize the inviolable value of each single human life. But if we also look at the issue from the standpoint of faith, every violation of the personal dignity of the human being cries out in vengeance to God and is an offense against the creator of the individual. In this context, it is worth recalling St. Teresa of Calcutta's generous and courageous commitment to the defense of every person conceived. 48. The Church also takes a stand against the practice of surrogacy, through which the immensely worthy child becomes a mere object. On this point, Pope Francis's words have a singular clarity. The path to peace calls for respect for life, for every human life, starting with the life of the unborn child in the mother's womb, which cannot be suppressed or turned into an object of trafficking. In this regard, I deem deplorable the practices of so-called surrogate motherhood, which represent a grave violation of the dignity of the woman and the child, based on the exploitation of situations of the mother's material needs. A child is always a gift and never the basis of a commercial contract. Consequently, I express my hope for an effort by the international community to prohibit this practice universally. 49. First and foremost, practice of surrogacy violates the dignity of the child. Indeed, every child possesses an intangible dignity that is clearly expressed, albeit in a unique and differentiated way, at every stage of his or her life. From the moment of conception at birth, growing up as a boy or a girl, and becoming an adult. Because of this unalienable dignity, the child has a right to have a fully human and not artificially induced origin, and to receive the gift of a life that manifests both the dignity of the giver and that of the receiver. Moreover, acknowledging the dignity of the human person also entails recognizing every dimension of the conjugal union and of human procreation. Considering this, the legitimate desire to have a child cannot be transformed into a right to a child, but fails to respect the dignity of that child as the recipient of the gift of life. 50. Surrogacy also violates the dignity of the woman, whether she is coerced into it or chooses to subject herself to it freely. For in this practice, the woman is detached from the child growing in her and becomes a mere means, subservient to the arbitrary gain or desire of others. This contrasts in every way with the fundamental dignity of every human being, and with each person's right to be recognized always individually and never as an instrument for another. 51. There is a special case of human dignity violation that is quieter but is swiftly gaining ground. It is unique in how it utilizes a mistaken understanding of human dignity to turn the concept of dignity against life itself. This confusion is particularly evident today in discussions surrounding euthanasia. For example, laws permitting euthanasia or assisted suicide are sometimes called death with dignity acts. With this, there is a widespread notion that euthanasia or assisted suicide is somehow consistent with respect for the dignity of the human person. However, in response to this, it must be strongly reiterated that suffering does not cause the sick to lose their dignity, which is intrinsically and inalienably their own. Instead, suffering can become an opportunity to strengthen the bonds of mutual belonging and gain greater awareness of the precious value of each person to the whole human family. 52. Certainly the dignity of those who are critically or terminally ill calls for all suitable and necessary efforts to alleviate their suffering through appropriate palliative care and by avoiding aggressive treatments or disproportionate medical procedures. This approach corresponds with the enduring responsibility to appreciate the needs of the sick person, care needs, pain relief, and affective and spiritual needs. However, an effort of this nature is entirely different from, and indeed is contrary to, a decision to end one's own life, or that of another person who is burdened by suffering. Even in its current state, human life carries a dignity that must always be upheld, that can never be lost, and that calls for unconditional respect. Indeed, there are no circumstances under which human life would cease from being dignified, and could, as a result, be put to an end. Each life has the same value and dignity for everyone. The respect of the life of another individual is the same as the respect owed to one's own life. Therefore, helping the suicidal person to take his or her own life is an objective offense against the dignity of the person asking for it, even if one would thereby be fulfilling the person's wish. We must accompany people towards death, but not provoke death or facilitate any form of suicide. Remember that the right to care and treatment for all must always be prioritized, so that the weakest, particularly the elderly and the sick, are never rejected. Life is a right, not death, which must be welcomed, but not administered. And this ethical principle concerns everyone, not just Christians or believers. As mentioned above, the dignity of each person, no matter how weak or burdened by suffering, implies the dignity of us all. 53. One criterion for verifying whether real attention is given to the dignity of every individual in society is the help given to the most disadvantaged. Regrettably, our time is not known for such care. Rather, a throwaway culture is increasingly imposing itself. To counter this trend, the condition of those experiencing physical or mental limitations warrant special attention and concern. Such conditions of acute vulnerability, which feature prominently in the Gospels, prompt universal questions about what it means to be a human person, especially starting from the condition of impairment or disability. The question of human imperfection also carries clear socio-cultural implications, since some cultures tend to marginalize or even oppress individuals with disabilities, treating them as rejects. However, the truth is that each human being, regardless of their vulnerabilities, receives his or her dignity from the sole fact of being willed and loved by God. Thus, every effort should be made to encourage the inclusion and active participation of those who are affected by frailty or disability in the life of society and of the Church. 54. In a broader perspective, it must be remembered that this charity, which is the spiritual heart of politics, is always a preferential love, shown to those in greatest need. It undergirds everything we do on their behalf. To tend those in need takes great strength and tenderness, effort, and generosity in the midst of a functionalistic and privatized mindset that inexorably leads to a throwaway culture. It involves taking responsibility for the present with its situations of utter marginalization and anguish, and being capable of bestowing dignity upon it. It will likewise inspire intense efforts to ensure that everything will be done to protect the status and dignity of the human person. 55. The Church wishes, first of all, to affirm that every person, regardless of sexual orientation, ought to be respected in his or her dignity and treated with consideration, while every sign of unjust discrimination is to be carefully avoided, particularly any form of aggression and violence. For this reason, it should be denounced as contrary to human dignity the fact that in some places, not a few people are imprisoned, tortured, and even deprived of the good of life solely because of their sexual orientation. 56. At the same time, the Church highlights the definite critical issues present in gender theory. On this point, Pope Francis has reminded us the path to peace calls for respect for human rights, in accordance with the simple yet clear formulation contained in the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, whose 75th anniversary we recently celebrated. These principles are self-evident and commonly accepted. Regrettably, in recent decades, attempts have been made to introduce new rights that are neither fully consistent with those originally defined nor always acceptable. They have led to instances of ideological colonization, in which gender theory plays a central role. The latter is extremely dangerous, since it cancels differences in its claim to make everyone equal. 57. Regarding gender theory, whose scientific coherence is the subject of considerable debate among experts, the Church recalls that human life in all its dimensions, both physical and spiritual, is a gift from God. This gift is to be accepted with gratitude and placed at the service of the good. Desiring a personal self-determination, as gender theory prescribes, apart from this fundamental truth, that human life is a gift, amounts to a concession to the age-old temptation to make oneself God, entering into competition with the true God of love, revealed to us in the Gospel. 58. Another prominent aspect of gender theory is that it intends to deny the greatest possible difference that exists between living beings: sexual difference. This foundational difference is not only the greatest imaginable difference, but is also the most beautiful and most powerful of them. In the male-female couple, this difference achieves the most marvelous of reciprocities. It thus becomes the source of that miracle that never ceases to surprise us, the arrival of new human beings into the world. 59. In this sense, respect for both one's own body and that of others is crucial in light of the proliferation of claims to new rights advanced by gender theory. This ideology envisages a society without sexual differences, thereby eliminating the anthropological basis of the family. It thus becomes unacceptable that some ideologies of this sort, which seek to respond to what are at times understandable aspirations, manage to assert themselves as absolute and unquestionable, even dictating how children should be raised. It needs to be emphasized that biological sex and the socio-cultural role of sex, gender, can be distinguished but not separated. Therefore, all attempts to obscure reference to the ineliminable sexual difference between man and woman are to be rejected. We cannot separate the masculine and the feminine from God's work of creation, which is prior to all our decisions and experiences, and where biological elements exist which are impossible to ignore. Only by acknowledging and accepting this difference in reciprocity can each person fully discover themselves, their dignity, and their identity. 60. The dignity of the body cannot be considered inferior to that of the person as such. The Catechism of the Catholic Church expressly invites us to recognize that the human body shares in the dignity of the image of God. Such a truth deserves to be remembered, especially when it comes to sex change, for humans are inseparably composed of both body and soul. In this, the body serves as the living context in which the interiority of the soul unfolds and manifests itself, as it does also through the network of human relationships. Constituting the being of persons, the soul and the body both participate in the dignity that characterizes every human. Moreover, the body participates in that dignity as it is endowed with personal meanings, particularly in its sexed condition. It is in the body that each person recognizes himself or herself as generated by others, and it is through their bodies that men and women can establish a loving relationship capable of generating other persons. Teaching about the need to respect the natural order of the human person, Pope Francis affirmed that creation is prior to us and must be received as a gift. At the same time, we are called to protect our humanity, and this means, in the first place, accepting it and respecting it as it was created. It follows that any sex change intervention, as a rule, risks threatening the unique dignity the person has received from the moment of conception. This is not to exclude the possibility that a person with genital abnormalities that are already evident at birth or that later develop may choose to receive the assistance of healthcare professionals to resolve these anomalies. However, in this case, such a medical procedure would not constitute a sex change, as is intended in the sense used here. 61. Although the advancement of digital technologies may offer many possibilities for promoting human dignity, it also increasingly tends towards the creation of a world in which exploitation, exclusion, and violence grow, extending even to the point of harming the dignity of the human person. Consider, for example, how easy it is, through these means, to endanger a person's good name with fake news and slander. On this point, Pope Francis stresses that it is not healthy to confuse communication with mere virtual contact. Indeed, the digital environment is also one of loneliness, manipulation, exploitation, and violence, even to the most extreme case of the dark web. Digital media can expose people to the risk of addiction, isolation, and gradual loss of contact with concrete reality, blocking the development of authentic interpersonal relationships. New forms of violence are spreading through social media for example cyberbullying, the internet is also a channel for spreading pornography and the exploitation of persons for sexual purposes or through gambling. In this way, paradoxically, the more that opportunities for making connections grow in this realm, the more people find themselves isolated and impoverished in interpersonal relationships. Digital communication wants to bring everything out into the open. People's lives are combed over, laid bare, and bandied about, often anonymously. Respect for others disintegrates, and even as we dismiss, ignore, or keep others distant, we can shamelessly peer into every detail of their lives. Such tendencies present a dark side of digital progress. 62. In this perspective, if technology is to serve human dignity and not harm it, and if it is to promote peace rather than violence, then the human community must be proactive in addressing these trends with respect to human dignity and the promotion of the good. In today's globalized world, the media can help us to feel closer to one another, creating a sense of the unity of the human family, which in turn can inspire solidarity and serious efforts to ensure a more dignified life for all. The media can help us greatly in this, especially nowadays, when the networks of human communication have made unprecedented advances. The internet in particular offers immense possibilities for encounter and solidarity. This is something truly good, a gift from God. We need constantly to ensure that present-day forms of communication are in fact guiding us to generous encounters with others, to pursue honest things in the whole truth, to service, to closeness, and to the underprivileged, and to the promotion of the common good. 63. On the 75th anniversary of the promulgation of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, Pope Francis reaffirmed that this document is like a master plan from which many steps have been taken, but many still need to be made, and unfortunately, at times, steps backwards have also been taken. The commitment to human rights is never finished. In this regard, I am near to all those who, without fanfare, in concrete daily life, fight and personally pay the price for defending the rights of those who do not count. 64. In this spirit, the Church, with the present declaration, ardently urges that respect for the dignity of the human person beyond all circumstances be placed at the center of the commitment to the common good and at the center of every legal system. Indeed, respect for the dignity of each person is the indispensable basis for the existence of any society that claims to be founded on just law and not on the force of power. Acknowledging human dignity forms the basis for upholding fundamental human rights, which precede and ground all civic coexistence. 65. Each individual and also every human community is responsible for the concrete and actual realization of human dignity. Meanwhile, it is incumbent on states not only to protect human dignity, but also to guarantee the conditions necessary for it to flourish in the integral promotion of the human person. In every political activity, we should remember that appearances notwithstanding, every person is immensely holy and deserves our love and dedication. 66. Even today, in the face of so many violations of human dignity that seriously threaten the future of the human family, the Church encourages the promotion of the dignity of every human person, regardless of their physical, mental, cultural, social, and religious characteristics. The Church does this with hope, confident of the power that flows from the risen Christ, who has fully revealed the integral dignity of every man and woman. This certainly becomes an appeal in Pope Francis's words directed to each of us. I appeal to everyone throughout the world not to forget this dignity which is ours. No one has the right to take it from us. The Supreme Pontiff, Francis, at the audience granted to the undersigned prefect of the Dicastery for the Doctrine of the Faith, with the Secretary for the Doctrinal Section of the Dicastery, on 25th March 2024, approved this declaration, which was decided at the ordinary session of this Dicastery on the 28th February 2024, and he ordered its publication. Given in Rome, at the Dicastery for the Doctrine of the Faith, on 2nd April 2024, the 19th anniversary of the death of Pope St. John Paul II. Victor Manuel Cardinal Fernandez, Prefect. Monsignor Armando Mateo, Secretary for the Doctrinal Session.